The Lone Pine Truck Plaza sat off I-57 in southern Illinois, a 24-hour rest stop where truckers refuel both their rigs and their stomachs. It wasn't much to look at, just a diner, a convenience store, and a sprawling lot filled with idling semis. But for the men and women who spent their lives on the road, it was a place of camaraderie, rivalry, and sometimes tension. That Friday night was no different. The diner was packed, the coffee was burnt, and the waitresses were moving fast to keep up with orders. Outside, rigs rumbled in and out of the lot, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The regulars were in their usual seats, swapping stories between bites of greasy burgers. But there was a storm brewing. It started when a wiry, sharp-faced trucker named Jimmy Razor Calloway swaggered into the diner. Razor had a reputation, always looking for an argument, always pushing buttons. He'd been on the road too long, his temper worn thin like the treads of an overworked tire. Seated at the counter, quietly nursing a cup of coffee, was Duke Parsons, a grizzled veteran of the road, with arms like tree trunks and a stare that could make a dispatcher rethink their whole career. Razor had a history with Duke, a history that involved a stolen route, a canceled job, and a bad fight over a poker game in Nashville. Razor smirked as he walked past Duke and accidentally knocked over his coffee. "Aw hell, looks like you got a spill there, old-timer," Razor said, his grin sharp as a switchblade. Duke wiped his arm off, his eyes narrowing. The truck stop had been peaceful tonight, and he intended to keep it that way. "Pick up your feet and keep walking, Razor." Razor laughed, loud and obnoxious. "Why don't you tell me that after I finish my steak, huh?" Duke clenched his jaw and turned back to his plate, but the atmosphere in the diner had already shifted. A few truckers at the booths leaned in, sensing trouble. Seated near the jukebox, Big Al Rodriguez, a barrel-chested trucker with hands the size of hubcaps, gave a knowing look to his buddy Travis T-Bone McGill. This ain't gonna end well. T-Bone, a lanky Texan with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, nodded. "Bet you $5 Razor gets his butt whooped." "Nah," Big Al said. "Duke ain't the type to start a fight, but if Razor throws first, Duke's gonna finish him." They didn't have to wait long. Razor, full of bad attitude and even worse decisions, decided to push it further. He ordered a steak, ate half of it, then loudly complained about the quality. "This steak tastes like it was cooked on an exhaust pipe," he announced. The cook, a burly guy named Manny, stepped out from the kitchen. "Ain't nothing wrong with my steak, man. You want to complain, go eat somewhere else." Razor leaned back, clearly enjoying himself. "Maybe I will, or maybe I'll get my money back first." Manny wiped his hands on his apron. "Ain't happening." Razor stood up, pushing his chair back just enough to bump into Duke. "See that? Even the help don't know how to do their jobs." Duke sighed and stood up. "You need to move along." Razor grinned. "Or what?" Then came the push. Razor shoved Duke just hard enough to make a point. The diner went silent. Duke looked down at Razor's hand, then up at his smirking face. "You sure about this?" Razor didn't answer with words. He swung. Duke dodged just enough for the punch to glance off his shoulder, then threw a fist straight into Razor's gut. The air left Razor's lungs with an audible oof, and he stumbled back into another trucker's table, spilling plates and coffee everywhere. That's when all hell broke loose. Razor's buddy Jesse Malone, a wiry trucker from Kentucky, jumped up to defend him, taking a wild swing at Duke. But before he could land a hit, Big Al grabbed Jesse and tossed him into a booth like he weighed nothing. That set off a chain reaction. T-Bone decided to get in on the action, threw a punch at another guy who looked like he might be siding with Razor. The guy dodged, but the punch hit someone else, a burly ex-Marine named Gus, who turned and decked T-Bone with one massive right hook. Dishes shattered, chairs scraped against the tile floor, a waitress screamed. Manny, the cook, grabbed a fire extinguisher and blasted the nearest cluster of fighting truckers. "Cool it, you fools. It didn't work." At the counter, the night shift manager, Doris, an older woman who had seen more fights than she cared to count, picked up the phone. "Yeah, Sheriff, we got another one." Meanwhile, outside in the parking lot, another set of truckers were catching wind of the fight inside. A few of them, already arguing over whose turn it was to fuel up, took the opportunity to settle their own disputes. By the time the first police cruiser arrived, 2 truckers were wrestling in the gravel. Another had been thrown onto the hood of a Peterbilt, and someone had backed into a gas pump in all the confusion. Sheriff Ray Daniels, a man built more like a retired linebacker than a lawman, stepped out of his cruiser and surveyed the scene. every Friday, he muttered. His deputies waded into the chaos, breaking up fights, shoving truckers apart, and pulling people out of headlocks. Inside the diner, Doris had taken control, wielding a metal coffee pot like a weapon to separate the last two fighters. Razor was on the ground, clutching his stomach. Duke was standing over him, arms crossed. "You done?" Duke asked. Razor coughed and nodded. Yeah, I'm done." Sheriff Daniels stepped into the diner, took one look around, and let out a deep sigh. All right, who started it this time? Every finger in the room pointed to Razor. Daniels rolled his eyes. Why am I not surprised? Manny wiped his hands on his apron. "You taking him in, Sheriff?" Daniels looked down at Razor. "Nah, but he's getting banned from Lone Pine for life." Razor groaned. "Oh, come on." "You want to spend the night in a cell?" Daniels asked. Razor shut his mouth. The sheriff looked around at the rest of the truckers. "Any more fights, I'm hauling all your butts in. You understand?" A murmur of agreement rolled through the room. Doris sighed, adjusting her apron. "All right, boys. Anyone who's not bleeding, get back in your seats. And if you broke anything, you're paying for it." One by one, the truckers settled back down, bruised but grinning, as if the whole thing had just been a Friday night tradition. Duke sat back at the counter. Big Al and T-Bone took their booth again. "You owe me $5, T-Bone muttered to Big Al. "Fair enough," Big Al said, passing the bill over. Manny shook his head and went back to the kitchen. "Idiots," he muttered, but there was a smile on his face. Outside, Razor limped to his truck, muttering curses under his breath. Sheriff Daniels watched him go, shaking his head. "See you never, Razor." And just like that, Lone Pine Truck Plaza went back to business as usual. Until next Friday, anyway. Thanks for joining us on the open road, where anything can happen, and there's always another adventure right around the corner. Remember before you leave to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the open road.